Hi guys, welcome to this video on Act 3, Scene 4 from Macbeth. Now I'm going to split this scene into two videos, so I'll deal with the second part of the scene in the next video, but overall this scene is about the feast that Macbeth holds for the lords that have supported him. Now obviously Banquo isn't going to be at this feast because he died in the previous scene, but he will be turning up in the second video. Now, in this part of the scene, the murderers arrive and inform Macbeth that they were able to kill Banquo, but that Fleance escaped. This causes Macbeth a lot of worry, because obviously with Fleance escaped, the prophecy for Banquo is still able to come true. So before we go through some of the annotation, let's just have a little listen to the scene.
Sit down at first and last. The hearty welcome.
Thanks to your majesty.
Ourself will mingle with society and play the humble host. Our hostess keeps her state, but in best time we shall require her welcome.
Pronounce it for me, sir, to all our friends. For my heart speaks. They are welcome.
See, they encounter thee with their hearts, thanks. Both sides are even. Here I'll sit in the midst. But first, we'll drink a measure the table round. There's blood upon my face.
'Tis Banquo's, then.
'Tis better thee without than he within. Is he dispatched?
My lord, his throat is cut. That I did for him.
Thou art the best of the cut-throats. Yet he's good that did the like for Fleance. If thou didst it, thou art the nonpareil.
Most royal sir, Fleance escaped.
Then comes my fit again. I'd else been perfect, whole as the marble, founded as the rock, as broad and general as the casing air. But now I'm cabined, cribbed, confined, bound into saucy doubts and fears. But Banquo's safe.
Aye, my good lord. Safe in a ditch he bides, with 20 trenched gashes on his head, the least a death to nature.
Thanks for that. There the groaned serpent lies, the worm that's fled has nature that in time shall venom breed. No teeth for the present.
My royal lord, you do not give the cheers.
Sweet remembrance. Now, good digestion waits on appetite.
And health on both.
Here had we now our country's honour. Roofed were the graced person of our Banquo present, who may be rather challenged for unkindness than pity for mischance.
His absence, sir, lays blame upon his promise. Will please your highness grace us with your royal company.
Okay, so now let's look at this part of the scene before Banquo's ghost arrives. But I think before we do, it's important to consider what Banquo's ghost, when he does arrive, may represent. So, Banquo's ghost, we need to consider it from two perspectives. Is it a hallucination, or is Macbeth seeing a real ghost? So he could be hallucinating because he's just been given a lot of details around Banquo's death, but at the same time, this play deals with a lot of themes around the supernatural. So we must consider whether this is a real ghost or not. As well, Banquo's ghost is very much an embodiment of Macbeth's guilt. You know, he's just had his best friend murdered by assassins, and Macbeth must feel something about that deep down. But at the same time, Banquo's ghost appearing and seeming to torment Macbeth is one of the consequences of his violence. So lots and lots of things to consider when dealing with Banquo's ghost when he does arrive. But before he gets there, let's look how he deals with the lords and how he deals with the murderers. So the first thing, when Macbeth says to the lords, "You know your own degrees, sit down at first and last the hearty welcome." This is a reference to the great chain of being and the idea that there is a hierarchy within society, and even within the lords there is a hierarchy. So they are sitting around this table within their positions of power. Macbeth then switches to prose for his address to the lords. Now there's a couple of things to consider with this. The first is this is obviously formal court speech. He's talking to them in the way that Duncan talked to Lady Macbeth when he encountered her at their castle. But at the same time, we could consider this use of prose as a sign of mental decline, as a sign of loss of control, and through degrading Macbeth's speech, as we will see later in the play, we see Macbeth's degradation and descent into corruption. Now look at some of the words that he says to the court. In previous scenes, we've seen Macbeth and Lady Macbeth say ambiguous things that could be seen as guilt emerging, or could be seen as their subconscious trying to confess. Now, it's only minor, but he says, "Ourself will mingle with society and play the humble host." Now this is an indication that Macbeth is prepared to be false, that he's not going to behave at face value. And now he's saying this directly to all of his lords. They may see it as him saying that he's going to, be kind and good. We know that for Macbeth, treachery and falsehood are kind of integral to him getting away with this murder. Remember the quotation, "Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it." Remember the quotation, "False face must hide what the false heart doth know." This is very much Macbeth kind of showing to them that he's going to be false. Because they don't know he's done the murder, they aren't aware that they're being deceived. This also, the word play, as we will see later in the play again, indicates that Macbeth sees himself as an actor. And this could be seen as him questioning the reality of his existence, or questioning his place within that reality, whether he has any control. It's just a little thing, but for getting into the top marks, if this were to come up, I think it's well worth going into those kind of more perceptive interpretations of the play. We then see the murderers enter, and Macbeth says to the first murderer, "There's blood upon thy face." Now this is the motif of blood again, although in this instance the blood represents violence and treachery. If you remember when Macbeth hallucinates the dagger with the blood on it, that is very much violence. When Lady Macbeth and Macbeth have blood on their hands, the blood there represents guilt. Well, here blood is representing violence and treachery. But also, Macbeth seeing blood on the murderer's face could be seen to foreshadow the hallucination or the ghost of Banquo, who has blood all over his face. The murderer then tells Macbeth that he's cut Banquo's throat, and Macbeth refers to him as the best of the cutthroats, showing a glorification of violence and him condoning this murdering of Banquo. However, when the murderer tells Macbeth that Fleance has escaped, we see more of Macbeth's mental health deterioration. We see more of Macbeth's paranoia and his concerns for the future. And we see this through this kind of juxtaposing imagery used in this tiny little speech. So Macbeth says, "Then comes my fit again." This fit being an indication of mental disturbance. He talks about before he knew that Fleance had escaped, he was whole as marble. Marble being a strong and permanent stone, but also the stone of Scone, where Macbeth went to be sworn in as king, is made of marble. So we could consider that reference to marble showing that Macbeth believed that he was as strong as a king was going to be, that he was secure in being a king. But now that Fleance is still alive, some of that security is disappearing. We then see him say, "as broad and general as the casing air," to show, that he felt really free, that he didn't feel constrained by this prophecy that Banquo had received, and that he felt comfortable as king. However, the juxtaposing imagery comes in for how he feels now. He says, "But now I am cabined, cribbed, confined, bound in to saucy doubts and fears." This shows that he's consumed and trapped by the fear of Fleance becoming king. It could also show that he's consumed and trapped by the guilt that he has over the murder of Banquo, or even the greed that he feels for the crown. He then finishes with this ironic question, but Banquo's safe, to mean Banquo is murdered and dead. You can understand why that is an ironic statement. The murderer then says that, yeah, he's dead, he's in a ditch, that he's 20 trench gashes in his head, which is more reference to violence, and the least a death to nature. Now, by saying that Banquo's gashes, the smallest, the least a death to nature, the smallest being a death to nature, kind of infers that Banquo is the representation of nature. And as we said before, Banquo embodies goodness and light and harmony. So is this the killer saying that Banquo's death is against nature? That Banquo's death flies in the face of the great chain of being and shows that it's unnatural, it shouldn't have happened. And this again develops the idea of the unnaturalness of Macbeth's actions, showing that Macbeth is against nature. So then Macbeth refers to Banquo as a serpent. He says, there the grown serpent lies. So Banquo is the snake, and the grown serpent is the adult. The worm that's fled hath nature, that in time will venom breed. So this is his concern, that Fleance over time will want vengeance for the death of his father, and that he will come and try to overthrow Macbeth with an army. We then just have another reference to time, tomorrow, that particular word. This is a motif that we've been tracking. And if you think about maybe what this represents in this speech, when Macbeth says tomorrow we'll hear ourselves again, if tomorrow is this kind of amorphous time that never really comes, and is never really there, as it has been throughout the play so far, then is this Macbeth recognising that he's never really going to feel fine, that things will never be good, because Fleance is still alive. However, in contrast to this, Lady Macbeth is most concerned with entertaining her guests. She says, my royal lord, you do not give the cheer. The feast is sold that it is not often vouched while 'tis a-making. 'Tis given with welcome. So she's saying that Macbeth needs to cheer up and sort himself out. Just consider, what does this show about her, and how is Lady Macbeth reacting differently to Macbeth? So now we're going to cover up until Macbeth notices Banquo's ghost, but for the audience, enter the ghost of Banquo, who sits in Macbeth's place. So the audience are aware that the ghost of Banquo is on the stage, but Macbeth hasn't yet realised that he is there. So Macbeth says, sweet remembrancer. So now Macbeth says, sweet remembrancer, in relation to Lady Macbeth trying to cheer him up. And there's an interesting parallel quotation to go with this, where in the scene that Macbeth discusses what to do with Banquo with Lady Macbeth, he says, let your remembrance apply to Banquo. So does this language summon Banquo's ghost? Is it a reference that calls back to the idea of Lady Macbeth remembering Banquo? Is it a little bit of foreshadowing for Banquo's ghost appearing? Now Macbeth comments on Banquo's non-arrival at the feast. He says, Banquo, who may I rather challenge for his unkindness than pity for mischance. So this is Macbeth trying to be sly. He's saying here that I would tell Banquo off for his unkindness rather than pity him for not being at this amazing feast, rather than feel sorry for him for not being here. And now this is a little bit of dramatic irony, isn't it? Because as an audience, we know that Banquo is dead, and in saying that he wouldn't pity him for not being there, kind of shows that Macbeth doesn't pity Banquo for being murdered now. Okay, now we'll cover the rest of the scene in the next video. We'll see Banquo's arrival as a ghost, Macbeth's reaction to him as a ghost, and cover that next video. Okay, I hope you found that useful, and I'll speak to you soon.